this is called deaf to glouglou. Glouglou, I don't know if everyone gets what it means because it doesn't really. It's actually I think it was coined. No, I don't think I read it, but it was coined by Émile Zola, who's a sort of a great writer, French, that we all, read his books when we're in 15 or something, and later. He wrote about the glouglou, and that's supposedly the sound that any liquid, but wine mostly, makes when it's poured really quickly. So there's sort of I'm not going to imitate that, but it's supposed to be, and it's become something else now, of course, that those wines that you pour really quickly, that you drink quickly, that are just made, and you get it's become sort of an exterior sign of coolness or a badge of honor for a lot of people today, especially maybe a younger generation in their 30s or something, who are discovering wine through natural wines and want something, as we say, I've heard it so many times, easy to drink. The question we're trying to ask this afternoon is this the new normal for natural wine? And does that make a wine shaggable or not? Is there a cultural schism, between sort of a classic approach to wine that are people who are over 60 still relate to every day, and can we build bridges and talk about those things? And so I have three winemakers with me today who are, as Andy said, really exactly on the edge, in between, or thinking about those things a lot. And so maybe if you could start by telling me, some are allergic to sulfites. Are you allergic to the word natural? Because I've read you don't really say that your wines are natural wines. Is this a political statement that you're making? Because you're making clean wines, you're making biodynamical wines. You could make wines that are considered natural. So maybe Laura, if you want to start.
Well, in Valgiano, we've been making wines since 30 years, since we bought the property in '93. And the type of farming we do is biodynamic. So if I had to give a definition, I would say biodynamic. But for me, the best definition is that it is a fine wine. And a fine wine cannot be made anywhere. So we don't generally say that, we don't generally give a definition of Valgiano as a natural wine. If the natural wine, if what we mean by natural wines are wines that don't have added sulfites, because in fact we add sulfites. Just before bottling, we add a tiny bit of sulfite. And nowadays, the theme of sulfite is very much, there's a lot of literature being used on sulfites. And frankly, I don't think that's what's the important thing, because what is the most dangerous element of the wine is the alcohol, which is the reason why we drink it. And the sulfur is not really what we care about. I'm personally actually allergic to sulfites, so we use very tiny bit. In a bottle of our wine, there's about 40 milligrams of total sulfite, so it's really a tiny amount. And actually, the life of our wines will make the sulfite dissolve. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
So what about you, Chiara, for the natural aspect of things?
It is very interesting because as I was growing up, and I was growing up in a family of farmers, so it's my grandfather who started, and so I'm the third generation, but I grew up in which at lunchtime the only discussion was wine, and the topic was wine. And but I grew up in a farming family in which growing vine was like incredibly in tune with the natural aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So trying to be as much as hands-off as possible, trying to be very connected and trying to be in synergy in tune with nature. So the word itself, natural wine, really reflect how we think farming. And it doesn't really reflect the acceptation that the word has gotten afterwards. But in the very initial germ of the definition, I was like, we were totally into it. Because for the way grandfather always farmed and the way we farm today, and the way I was taught by grandfather that nature itself, it's perfect. So if you're trying to make a natural wine, the wine will be as close as possible to nature, thus perfect. So I grew up with the idea of natural wine as being the most perfect of all wines. So wines that had more energy, wines that had more enlightenment, so wines that were more alive, that had more ability to age because they had more life in it, and in a way that could reflect more the place that they were coming from, because they had this synergy and this strong connection in within the nature and the place they were coming from. So what has got to the term later on was something that has been driven by, I think, different mechanisms, but the very first origin of it, I think it was in a very sincere approach and totally respectful for what it is.
Mateja, do you use the word natural for your wines, or is it something that you don't want to have as a badge or as a label?
No, the problem is not what we want or not. This is a definition other people gave us. So it's often crazy that other people have this need to define, to find a place to put you in order to know what you are, how you are working, how you live, what's your philosophy, not only life, but even work philosophy. So I totally agree with both with Laura and Chiara, because as simpler you work, then more other people need to define you. And this is sometimes difficult to understand, because the simplest things, the simplest behavior is the most difficult to pass and to make other people thinking and perceiving.
And let's talk about maybe the relationship that you all have with time, because there's sort of the cliche about natural wines that they don't age well, which is obviously more than a cliche, it's a mistake, I think. But and especially you, Mateja, when many wines are already drunk and forgotten in their prime years, when I go to a wine bar in Paris where I live, I drink 2020s, 2019s if I'm sometimes 2018s if I'm lucky, but it's difficult to get younger, older wines. And your wines actually are not even in the bottle when they're from 2018. So if you could tell us a little bit about that and how you work. You make mostly white maceration wines in Cuevri, which is amphoras, and then in barrels for, I think, 6 years. So that's 7 years total.
Exactly. We just bottled 2015. And we are really into this because we really believe that once we bottle the wine has to be ready, which means we don't have to hurry the wine. Our wines are not filtrated, are not fined, and it's absolutely not necessary once you give time to wine. The wine has a natural evolution, and it's more than able to get clean by itself. So why should we hurry it? Just to release it earlier, just to sell it earlier, but everything, especially with the natural, when you hurry something, you don't allow the natural process to finish, to come to the natural end, and which means that after the wine is not able by itself to age. So once you hurry a wine, the wine has a shorter life once you bottle it. And this is something we don't want to have, because as Laura told before, wine is not exactly something we need in life, or we like it, we live for wine, but it's not something you compulsory have to survive. And once you decide to drink wine, it should be a good wine. So why should we hurry it? Why should we have a wine which is released too early? It's true that this so-called natural movement made a lot of new producers coming in, which is a wonderful, super team. But it's even true that sometimes they don't have the ability, the space, and sometimes even the financial power to wait a little bit longer for wine, which is okay. We all have to grow. We all have to increase our knowledge, but start doing it, not just talking about we have to do it. So it's something we have to, maybe we spoiled the consumer releasing so young and not completely ready wines and telling them that these are the natural wines. So I think we have to go back to the final consumer and tell, okay, this is a nice wine. Maybe sometimes it's okay to have a glouglou wine, so a very easygoing and fresh wine, but don't forget that the focus is something else. So we have to help new producers, we have to increase their knowledge, we have to try to make them becoming a little bit stronger in order to be able to produce wines they are able to age, they are able to be preserved for a longer period.
Well, thank you. That's really interesting. It's also in the relationship that I have with those wines. If I talk about also what I like about TV series is that the fact that they grow old with us sometimes, the ones that last really. Well, actually, it's pretty much the same with wine. You know, this process that you age with the bottle and you drink it when you're ready to drink it, maybe not when it's ready. But so what is your relationship with time, maybe Chiara, and aging? And
this is something I'm very close to because the very first idea of grandfather was, in fact, making a wine for the purpose of long-term aging. So since the very first beginning, when nobody in the region was really aging the wines of our region, he started to put aside bottles. Like the very first idea was long-term aging, and it was like nobody had done that before. But he was so convinced that his wines could improve with time that he started to age half of his production every year. And that, to me, it's very tightly connected to why a wine should be alive in order to age. A wine that has been industrially made, that has chemical in it, is dead. So it's never going to age. But the beauty of wines that are made with an attention and a respect towards nature, they have a different sparkle in them, and they have the ability for long-term aging. But the idea that also grandfather had, it's always a very funny story, because grandfather never wanted his wines to be served cold, especially his whites, because he was alive. And one day he has his wine served way too cold, and he said to the restaurateur, "Would you put your wife in the fridge?" Like, okay. You don't put something that it's alive in the fridge, because it's like it kind of closes everything. But happens today that then we have more than 350,000 bottles aging in the cellar. Oh, okay. So there's a whole program of aging bottles and releasing bit by bit for different purposes. First, because we make wine with the intention of long-term aging from the very first beginning. So clearly we want that every single organism in the vineyard is strongly alive. So we farm biodynamically, and we do as much as we can to make sure that we're fully in tune with vine growing. And then vinification happens with spontaneous fermentation, so only natural yeast. And we always try to make a wine that has everything that it's needed for it to have everything for its long-term aging. So it has enough body and structure and acidity and has been untouched the whole time and has everything to protect himself from the age. And then we store it away, and then normally half of the production goes into the aging, and then it's released afterwards. So to me, when we talk about wine and aging, it requires a lot of trust from the producer, because when you age a wine, you say, I trust you. I trust that you can get better with time. And that takes a lot of courage from the producer, because it's not always the case, so we don't do that all the time, but we try to make that happen all the time. And so with time, you just make sure that the complexity of the wine broadens. So at the beginning, you have a tiny little baby, and probably you can always say yes to him. What can you say to a little baby? And then when you can talk to an adult, then you can have a full-on conversation. So that's pretty much the idea. It's the also intelligence that it's required in order to, when you drink an older wine versus a very young one.
So you mean most people drink like teenagers, actually, which is very bad.
Yeah. Lazy.
I see. Laura, do you make wine for the ages in Tuscany also? Do you think about that, the process?
Certainly, yes. In Valgiano, we have two terroirs, so you have this word in France, which we don't in Italy, but so one terroir is very much limestone, calcare, which gives a wine which needs at least 2 years to be released and gets consumed within 5 to 8 years, and has a good potential of aging. And the other wine, which is our flagship, is a completely different soil. So it has limestone in depth, sand, clay, then alluvia on top. And this is a very old soil from the pre-glacial era. It's 60 million years old. And so the vine will suck the minerality from all these different rocks, giving a wine which has a much more complexity and a much longer potential of aging. So now I can say that our wines can age at least 30 years, because I started 30 years ago, so I couldn't say it earlier than that. I mean, Chiara, they've been making wine for so many years, so she
more
can
than
say.
60 years, I think, right? Yes. So if we go to your domain, we can have a real vertical. We can drink wines from the past 30 years.
Yes, so I can offer the wines, and they are very different from a year to another, because the climate every year is different, so every year the wine's different. So that's also interesting. I can give you a vertical tasting with wines which differ a lot.
It is. Is it something you think about when you sell the wine? If you could, would you keep the wine before selling it too early, or do you trust the consumers or the restaurants or the everyday people who buy your wine to drink it the right way, if there is a right way? I don't know.
Well, I try to explain to the customer this is a wine that needs at least another 3 years, because our experience is that our wines stay on the fruit for the first 7 years, and then after the 7th year, the evolution starts. So it depends what your clients like. If he likes a wine on the fruit, then you can offer the wine already when it's 5 to 6 years old. But if he prefers it with the evolution, which means, you know, some black truffle, some white truffle, or some underwood, then you should wait a little longer.
Mm-hmm. And what do you reply to people who say, I want fruit, I want a juice, I want my wine to be easy to drink?
Then I say, try Palistorti, which is the other wine which is on the limestone, because that's more on the fruit, normally.
So that's okay with you? You don't have anything against that, the fact that we drink young wines that are very green in a way, or that?
No, I think it's a bit of a shame sometimes when you go to restaurants that the wines are too young. And in the same way, I think in the wine, a wine list is interesting when there is a depth and a number of vintages from the wine producers.
Yeah, and many restaurants cannot really afford that, especially some younger restaurants that have only, that's what I was mentioning earlier. But Mateja, what do you think is the right time to drink your wines? Do you give out leaflets when you sell them, or do you force people to keep them? Or
this is the most difficult advice to give, because some people prefer a little bit fresher wine, some other need to have more complexity, which is and something which is very difficult to make some people thinking about is that complexity is not complicated. Complexity is a lot of different things together, and the wine is having an incredible evolution even once you put it in a glass, which doesn't mean that the wine becomes complicated, difficult, impossible to approach. I think the worst definition I often hear is that it's a wine which is not for everyone. Why? It's a wine every person can approach. Depending how well and how much you know about wine, it will give you different feelings, different taste, but it's not something impossible to approach. It's not, you don't need to have 3 degrees in order to approach such a wine. Come on, we all have a mouth, we all are able to eat and to drink, so everyone is able to approach such a wine. So what is the correct time? It's not always easy to say. We have friends, they prefer our wines just released. Other, they are always looking for the oldest vintage available. So this is then a personal taste. And then depending on the vintage, something we learned in the last 30 years is that there are not good or bad vintages. It's not our decision, and we just have to follow what the nature is giving us. It's like having children. It's not true that the mechanic is the stupid one and the engineer is the good one. We have Ferrari in Italy, so come on, it's not, you can't say that one is better or worse than another one. Just with what you are, with what the nature is giving you, try to do your best. So some vintages are ready quite easily and quite quick. Some other need a little bit longer to get ready. But this is even the highest and the nicest wonder that the nature is giving us.
And just to come back to the topic that sort of, I don't know, but that I think about a lot is this: how do you communicate with the generation of drinkers who are used to to those light wines and easy wines? Do you have to do is there anything that you can teach them, or that they could teach you actually about your wines, or about, is there a communication between, the wine bars in the great capitals, and they serve those kind of wines, and how do you try to put your wines in these places? Do you not want them to be there, or?
Well, if I can, I think there are many opportunities in this moment because there's a truth when you make wine like that it's easy to recognize. Like in any single style you decide to make, when there is an intention behind it to make something that is true to the season, true to the place, it's easy to get. It speaks so much louder than anything else. So it is true that sometimes it's unpretentious and it's easy to understand, lighter, easier drinking wine. But then it's like when you meet a person and you start to engage in a more interesting conversation, nobody would retract if there is a good purpose on the other side. And you can engage a proper conversation that can reach a higher level of being more interesting and excitement. So I think it's pretty much the case. Like once you make something that it's genuine, that it's good quality, that also has a different level of complexity and takes longer time. You can still open a pathway in other people's hearts because they can see that on the other side there is only like a good intention of respecting the terroir in which the wine has been made. So, and there's not that huge friction. It is very true that there are people that are clearly only wanted to drink easy drinking wine, and that's clearly, that's the chosen. It's totally fine. But then I think when you're asking for more out of people, you always get more. And also when there is always a very good engagement that talks wine at a deeper level, you always get interest on the other side. And it's very good sometimes to go deeper on things and ask for more complexity from it. I think it's always good. So.
Mateja and Laura, do you agree with what Chiara said? Do you have anything you'd like to add to what she said?
No, I think it's very clear also, probably for us, we are into it, so I hope even for other people is, but it's like having a good meal. You just enjoy it, and after you feel well. And it's that easy that it's much more difficult to explain it than experience it. So maybe for this reason, people sometimes need to find a definition, because it's such a basic instinct to go toward good things, toward nice things, that until you experience it, it's much more difficult to explain and to tell about it than experience itself.
Laura, did you want to?
Well, I try to draw the attention to the quality of the tannins.
Yes.
So to have, to try and feel the viscosity of the wine, the matter, the texture. Is it silky? Is it velvety? Is the viscosity? So this will interest the person who's tasting the wine, rather than just doing an analysis on the nose and on the palate. And by the way, the industry can do amazing things by tricking the wines in the cellar, whereas when a wine is 99% made in the vineyard, like in our case, there's nothing that we really do in the cellar to change the liquid expression of our landscape. So
so it's about opening the senses and the taste. And I have one last thing I'd like to ask, because I think we have to wrap up soon. Everybody wants to drink now. It's how do you relate to accidents? Because in art, for example, accidents are often very interesting in film, and I don't hate to eat a plate that's sort of weird and strange, and there has a little taste problem at some point, and a lot of young natural wines and some other natural wines that are made in a very little bit of a vibrant way or a different way, they are looking for defects in a way, and that's a big debate also. But how do you relate to defects or mostly, actually, the better word is accidents? Do you have a relationship to that idea when you make wine? I know, Laura, you have a story, but maybe Mateja or Chiara first.
Of course, then less intervention you do, then easier is to have something going wrong. Once you decide not to use chemicals, not to correct, then everything which is not going perfectly could be a catastrophe. So we have to avoid this. And this is the reason we work so hard in the vineyards in order to bring perfect grapes to the cellar. But small mistakes are sometimes can be quite nice, quite funny. Then it's very difficult to tell and to decide what a small defect is, because maybe for me something is small, for other people this is very important. Some people are really lovers of volatile acidity, some other can't accept it. So this is then a very personal perception. But we always have to remember that people, they pay for our wines. They are giving us not only their money, but especially their time. And we should be really respectful about other people's time. So I like when I see that someone is trying to make good wines, despite there is some little defect. As far as I see that vintage after vintage, these defects are becoming smaller and smaller, and there is an improving. If a defect is a kind of stamp for a supposed to be natural wine, for a supposed to be glouglou wine. I'm sorry, I'm not a big fan of these ones.
Okay. Laura, what do you think about accidents and mistakes?
Oh, many accidents happened in our winery, and a few years ago, in 2010, we were making the white wine, so we put all the bunches of the white grapes in a big press. So it's a big cylinder which has an internal lung that squeezes the bunches, and the juice is collected under it. Mm-hmm. And then it's transferred directly into the stainless steel. So the press broke on a Friday afternoon. Nobody came to mend it until the Monday morning, so the grapes stayed with the juice for 48 hours. And the wine which came out in 2010 was very different to what we normally make. It was flirty with oxidation. It had a slight amber color, and we thought it was the worst wine we ever made. But we finished it within a month. So since then, we do 18 hours of skin contact.
That's cool. Chiara, what about accidents for you? Is it a philosophy as well, or is it?
Well, it's clearly once you decide to make the wines in a certain way, you embrace a whole ethic of winemaking, which is controlling very little. So you can be very, very attentive, and that's what you have to be to make sure that nothing goes wrong. But still, you accept the risk of not controlling everything, because you're not inoculating yeast and you're not controlling your fermentation, and you have thousands of population of yeast that can come from anywhere, from the vineyard, from your cellar, from your neighbors, that can play a role into your fermentation. You allow like this the beauty of complexity, but also the risk of not knowing exactly what's happening. So yeah, things happen for sure, Lord. There are many things that can go wrong and do go wrong. There is then you gotta accept and understand what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, knowing that you do all this for a very specific ethic of production, and not accepting the compromise of allowing no risk to happen and having like chemicals into your wine. So to me, that's what it's all about.
That's the real enemy.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.